Hey, everybody. Welcome to Battleground Podcast. It's awesome to have you here. This week, we have an incredible guest. His name is Rich Baris, a.k.a. the People's Pundit. He is a pollster that I look to a lot, both during my 2020 congressional race and 2022 Senate race and thereafter. Rich is unique because I think because not only does he have a solid methodology, and when you're polling, its methodology is really important to have the proper sample size, the right questions, look at the right crosstabs, things like that. Rich has all of those things on lockdown. But what I also like about Rich is that he understands the cultural moment that we're in right now. And so many pollsters exist inside the Beltway in Washington, and they're really, quite frankly, out of touch with what is going on in congressional districts and in states really all across the country. Well, Rich comes from, a middle-class, blue-collar family, knows what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck, and really goes out of his way to understand the issues that matter to people and the cultural, really historical cultural moment that we're in right now. That's why I like him. And so this episode, we talk about everything political. We do a postmortem on 2022, why the red wave did not happen. And we look forward to 2024. We have a look at both the Republican ticket with Ron DeSantis now in the race. What does that presidential race look like in 2024? Can Trump win? I think he can. I look forward to you hearing what Rich says about all that. But we also look at the Democrat ticket. So I think Rich is great. I think you'll like the show. And as always, if you're listening to this or you're watching this, please subscribe to the show. We need it. It helps us. Leave a review. Comment on social media. Share screenshots on Instagram if you like the show. I'll reshare them in my story. This show is really for you, and none of it's possible without you. So as always, thank you so much for your enduring support. I'm always deeply grateful for it and humbled by it. God bless you all. And without further ado, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Rich. The People's Pundit, Rich Baris, joins me today on the show. Rich, thank you for coming on. I turn to you anytime I'm looking to get a sense of where we are as a country from a polling standpoint. And so thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Sean. It's good to be here.
So there's so much to talk about. I have so many questions for you, but one of the things that jumped out at me right away, Rich, like when you read your bio or you do any bit of research into you, is that you're an Army guy. I'm an Army guy. So I got to ask you, how did you make the jump from a guy who volunteered to serve the country to polling in one of the most hostile, thankless professions on the face of the earth?
I think you'll probably understand this better than most people would, Sean. So after 9/11, which I was still kind of young when 9/11 happened, but after 9/11, the Army started a program called the 18 X-ray program, and I did want to serve in some capacity. My grandfather was in the Army. My godfather was in the Army. And I was thinking about the Navy, thinking about maybe SEALs, because back then I used to do martial arts, and one of my instructors, his father, is a big-name guy. A lot of people probably know who he is, but Jim Watson, Patches Watson. So they were trying to nudge me to the Navy. But I had a familial connection with the Army, and I also like the mission of Green Berets a little bit better. I like the idea of going in there and just not in and out, but, staying with these people, teaching them how to defend themselves. But I got hurt. I did a lot of the hard stuff. That's not much to tell. I got hurt. And like a lot of other guys, when I got out, I really didn't know where to go. I actually had a really hard time readjusting, because I don't have to tell you, the Army is, when you're happy in the Army and you love what you do in the Army, it's the best job in the world. It's the best life in the world. You'll have the best friends you'll ever have, in your life when you're doing that. So it was difficult for me to adjust. I did always have numbers in my background, right? So even in the Army, I wanted 18 Charlie, which is engineering. And it was pretty easy to get with aptitude and my background. But when I got out, I did not immediately jump into politics. I actually was in a host of different financials. We did IPOs for a while. We did, portfolio management. I ended up being a local financial advisor, and I just wanted something different. And I was always involved in politics. And again, trying to find what I'm going to do after the Army. I wound up in Florida, and I ended up at the University of Florida, where if you love politics and you love this industry in general, it's a good place. With the election project there, and on your spare time, nerds are like trying to develop election projection models, right? And I had a lot of people, a lot of good professors around. One in particular that really sent me on this direction. He was like, "Look, you've been a numbers guy your whole life. Instead of getting a useless, bachelor's of arts degree or whatever you're here trying to do, I think you may appreciate this." And really, the rest is history. And I did look at that time. You had the crystal ball, Larry Sabato, right? So you had, the Nate Silvers of the world were still not really that big at that point. So we were, doing this, for a while, just. I know it sounds stupid, but kind of for fun. And I always, volunteered. I remember my first presidential election volunteering for that, and that was in Jersey. So, I've been doing this for a while, but not as a profession. And then I'm like a lot of people, and I changed my career midway. But when you're coming out of the Army, you don't really have a plan. I didn't. Going into the Army, I thought I'm a soldier. I'm going to be a soldier. I love it. So I stumbled into this because I didn't have a plan B for getting hurt. I just didn't. And I'm glad I did, because I think this business basically saved my life, kept me focused. It wasn't an easy road, but I had a knack for it.
Well, you clearly believe in it, and you can tell by the way that you back your numbers, and you mix it up with people on Twitter defending yourself all the time. This is what I mean by polling. Politics, but especially polling, is a very difficult place for people to live and to operate and to work, because, as you saw going into 2016 with President Trump coming down the escalator, and really the Trump derangement syndrome of the media. Like, I think when President Trump became the nominee in 2016, people lost their minds and lost a lot of faith in, the conventional mainstream media. Also people lost a ton of faith in pollsters, because, you look at some of the models back then, Rich. I think everybody thought that Hillary Clinton was going to run away with this thing. I even think Hillary thought she was going to run away with it. And I always think back, as evidenced by her thinking she was going to run away with it, the picture of her happy birthday to this future president, which she still gets trolled on like to this day. But so people don't trust pollsters. Yeah. And so clearly you found your niche in not just the numbers, Rich, and this is what I'm building to, like understanding where people are in this cultural moment that we live in today.
I like to pride myself, Sean, in still being a part of the process too. And I think I do that, and a lot of others don't. I have literally polled people myself who will say, wait a minute, I think I know who this is. Is this really him? They don't expect that. They expect the call center. I constantly monitor employees who give the interviews. I want to listen. I think that my background, not being born with a silver spoon in my mouth and, coming from a working class area, first in New York, then in New Jersey, I think I heard what people were saying in 2015 and 2016, but a little differently than other people did. So I came from an area. I remember the local door and window manufacturing company. If you didn't have a job, you could always go to Suburban, and they'll give you $12 or $14 an hour until you find something new. I remember that closing down. I remember my friends going to vocational schools and not being able to use it because There were illegal immigrants on the corner of 7-Eleven that businesses would stop and pick up, and they could do it for $6 an hour instead of paying my friends an actual wage that they trained for. So I think my experience made me, allowed me to listen to these people and not dismiss their concerns or their grievances outright. And I also came in this at a time where I don't know why the media had for so long hid this from people. But even 2004, the exit polling debacle in 2004, there had been a problem with polling for a long time. And people just weren't told about it. And I think that it didn't come into everyone's attention until they blew a presidential race, which just doesn't always happen. Gallup gave up in 2012 because they predicted Mitt Romney was going to win. And they flatly said, we're out of the horse race business. This is too hard, and we don't think it's responsible to do moving forward. In 2015 and 16, we were totally different than everybody else. We changed how we did our modes of collection. We're not always live calling people. There are just some people who will not stay on the phone with an agent or an interviewer on, a 20-minute call to be interviewed about their political beliefs. They're not going to do it. So you have to reach them other ways. But even still, and this is why we're always on Twitter mixing it up, because there are records we can defend ourselves, right? So everyone's going to miss once in a while, but without a doubt, my record, I stand by it because I'm proud of it. In 2016, though, we still did underestimate Trump. We did think he was going to win, but, in Ohio, our final poll was like 3 points, Trump plus 3, right? So we still had to adjust moving forward, obviously missing some voters, but they were stubborn, Sean, and wouldn't do it. And someone like me is not welcome, in this, in this industry.
It's interesting because you talk about coming up in a working class area. I did as well. I come from a family of Western Pennsylvania Union Democrats. And when you come from that background, it just shapes the way that you view the world. And, everybody in your neighborhood, where they work, when someone loses their job. And when that happens, how that affects families. So and I think what we have now, Rich, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you have a lot of pollsters that are they're inside the Beltway. They work for consultants. They all think the same way. And it's been that way for a long time. And I just feel like that's why they get it wrong, and so polling can't just be about the empirical data and the numbers. I mean, obviously methodology and sample size is really, really important. And how you ask questions is really, really important, because how you ask a question can determine how someone answers, really. But not understanding the trials and tribulations of where the people are at a specific moment in time has to be part of it. And so I don't know how. I mean, certainly there's no substitute for being on the ground, running a campaign and putting your finger on the pulse of a congressional district or a state. But how can pollsters, or how have you been able to tap into where people are, say, in the Rust Belt, where, as of this moment, Donald Trump has what seems to be a commanding lead on Ron DeSantis in the critical Rust Belt?
They say that polling's part art and part science, right? It's a lot of art. And I love history. I love not just looking at where the state is now. And in your state, for instance, I love where it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And I think, and I don't mean to pick on them, but I did use this as an example when I was asked by the Washington Post recently. If you're Nate Cohen, at the New York Times, and you're sitting at your cubicle every day inside your office, you're not getting out, you're not taking the pulse of anybody, you think calling them on the phone is enough, and you're not realizing, by the way, that you're going to reach certain people like that. Depending on what mode you're using to reach people, you're going to reach different people, because these different groups respond to different modes at different rates. Not me. There's no substitute for doing it myself and appreciating the history and the different ancestral voting patterns. So if you're him and you call like Greene County, Pennsylvania, for instance, and he did this in 2020, and he had Biden leading Trump there without a second thought about what Greene County is. Yeah, there are a lot of registered Democrats, but Trump carried Greene County against Hillary Clinton. It's ridiculous to think that Biden's going to be ahead there by 60+%. But, he doesn't realize he probably called the only public library, the only Democrat who works at the public library in Greene County that still was going to vote for Joe Biden over Donald Trump. It didn't dawn on him that is wrong, because they don't really understand Americans, or at least the Americans that are between the coastal areas where they work and they live, right? And they have their friends and their social groups. They don't care about that, and may even, if we're being honest, they may even despise those people, and think, at least hope, that they're not that significant of the population, when in fact they are, right? So I think that you really can't lose. It can't become all about the numbers. If it does, then you're going to miss out. And I didn't want to give away some secrets, but there have been things, even anybody is subjected or can be, or fall victim to your own biases and your own, wishful thinking. And we have in place some safeguards for that have really, everyone's going to test at some point. And we have them in place. They seem to be working. Again, everyone misses once in a while, but for the most part, you have to know yourself and human nature, and you're going to lean to want to do certain things. And there's nothing in place. There's only things that are in place to reinforce their own views. There's nothing in place to challenge them. And that's a problem. Big problem.
And so how do you measure the hidden Trump voter? I mean, because if you've been involved in politics since Donald Trump has been involved in politics as a major player, you know that there is a significant percentage, I would say, of conservative Donald Trump supporters who don't like to talk about it, and come hell or high water, they aren't talking about it on the phone. Yeah. And so, having run 2 campaigns in Pennsylvania, I know that is almost always underestimated in polling. They don't. And by the way, Rich, this is also at a time where trust in our institutions are at an all-time low. The FBI, everything that happened with COVID and the CDC, this sort of the woke mind virus has penetrated into all our institutions and has compromised trust in all sorts of ways. But because of that, people don't want to talk on the phone to anyone and talk about their political views, when if those views become public, they could lose their job in some cases.
So there's it's not easy, but there are a couple of things that I think we're doing that is helpful. And followers know this. So we have what we call the social bias indicators. And basically every survey will ask people a series of questions about whether they're comfortable talking about their political views, such as who are you going to vote for? And we'll measure them and see. I'm not sure there's any way to totally account for it, and we're not going to put our thumb on the scale. We just hope that we can possibly identify how big of a social bias there may be. So if we're off, in Trump support or any candidate support by a few points, at least we can look back and say, you know what, 40% told us that they were very uncomfortable being honest in this question. And we'll say that. How comfortable are you speaking with your friends, family members, coworkers, strangers, your neighbors? And we also asked, the last one is pollsters. How comfortable are you right now being honest? And I'll tell you, I thought under Biden, maybe we would see a little bit of a correction, but it's not true, because you're right. It's not Trump who did it. It's the institutions who did it, and the media who constantly reinforce it. You're a bad person if you hold these views. So we look at it like that, but also a big part of this, Sean, is, again, those modes. The day of live caller to the cell phone, to the landline, has got to end. You're going to reach more educated people like that are much more comfortable. You're not going to get the steel worker in Allegheny County or Western Pennsylvania. They're just not going to talk to you. If you do reach them online, or maybe you send them a text message, and you have to reassure them that your responses are anonymous, they're confidential. Oh, and by the way, you have some time to finish the survey. You don't have to complete it right now. So we have a number of things that we've developed over time. But at the end of the day, look at what happened in Kentucky. Cameron won by 30 points next to Kelly Craft. Nobody predicted that, right? That's just the way it is sometimes. It's just and that largely came from populated urban areas. Louisville, the suburbs outside of the excerpts, right? Outside of urban areas. That actually tends to be where we find a lot of the social bias. You would think it comes from rural areas, and that's, where Republicans get their support. But actually, when it comes to this new brand of republicanism, it's people in the suburbs and in cities, or exurbs next to cities. They don't want to tell you. They don't want to be honest. And that's where we call them signals. They throw us signals, right? So it's a very high percentage you say they're uncomfortable right now. The highest signals are in the exurbs and in normal suburbs.
That is fascinating, man. So let's do a postmortem on 2020, because I feel like many pundits, or we can do 2020, but let's talk 2022 for just a second, because I want to get your take on, the outcome of many of those races. You look at any pundit, they would say, oh, there's going to be a red wave. They also trot out, I think, the tired cliche, well, there's the party in the White House usually suffers in the midterms. And if, Democrat Joe Biden's in the White House, it means that he's going to get crushed in these midterm races. And after all the election changes in 2020 in a post-COVID world, and especially in swing states, using my state as an example, with the no excuse mail-in ballot law in place, it completely changed the way that we conduct elections here with an automatic opt-in. And what I mean by that for the viewers and listeners is that in Pennsylvania, they changed the law so that, if you request a mail-in ballot, you can check that automatic opt-in box and get a ballot mailed to your door in every election for the rest of your life. Yep. And they did that during the highest presidential turnout in American history in 2020. And so the idea that, well, the party in the White House usually suffers in the midterms, that is gone. That conventional wisdom is gone, because that enthusiasm, if you have a smoothly oiled ballot chasing machine, which the Democrats do in almost every swing state, that conventional wisdom is gone, because their turnout is always going to be the floor of what it was. 2020 was the floor, and that was a pretty damn high turnout election. So all these pundits said that conservatives were going to crush it. Republicans were going to crush it in the midterms. Conservatives didn't. And in a state like Pennsylvania, we end up, electing a turnip in John Fetterman. So what happened?
Yeah, there are a couple things, and it's almost like you really can't talk about 2022 unless you talk about 2020, because they completely changed the nature of American elections. And Republicans went into this thing thinking it was a game of persuasion. The numbers looked good. All of the ingredients for a red wave were there. And basically the infrastructure that Democrats had in place from 2020, which was not pushed back, which was not rolled back. There was a fight over whether or not we should even bother talking about it, right? That they carried forward. And while they didn't harvest 81 million votes across the country, they harvested them where they needed to. And Republicans wound up winning the popular vote, but barely taking the House, and underperformance in the Senate is an understatement. They blew it badly. Scott, I'm a little bit surprised. Take somebody like Herschel Walker in Georgia. It still was really, really close, even though Warnock was paying $40 an hour to go out and harvest ballots, and Walker was not. And Republicans didn't see that. They got completely blindsided by it. But there really does need to be some plan moving forward, because you said it's the floor. It's the truth. And we're seeing that's in place. So taking in consideration that infrastructure is still in place, we're seeing ridiculous, unprecedented levels of percentages of people are telling us in 2024, I'm certain I'm going to vote. Normally we're in the 60s right now, maybe, 62% would say I'm certain to vote. We're already in the 70s. In some places it's 80s. We're going to have a monstrous turnout, whether it's harvested or not. And that's why I think, I'll leave that for another discussion, I guess, or another question. But there's no doubt, there's an article in Real Clear Politics a couple of days ago, and they nailed it. Democrats had that where they needed to have it. And normally, pundits thinking that Republicans have a more efficient midterm vote, they're more enthusiastic, their voters vote at higher turnouts in off-cycle elections. All of that went by the wayside because Democrats still had this infrastructure in place. And they do it through third parties, by the way. It's not done through the DNC. So you have Ronna McDaniel out there talking on Hannity, I need money to build this infrastructure. Democrats didn't build it through the DNC. So I don't know how at this point, this late in the game, the RNC would even think that they could catch up. This has to be done through third-party entities because they know their areas better than any national organization, potentially could. But again, Sean, that really is the kicker, is that all of the ingredients, it was there. They had, all they had to do was realize what happened in 20 and adjust how they think about winning elections, because it's no longer a game of persuasion. Like I said before, when early vote starts, it's like, a race at the Olympics. The gun goes off and it's the chase to go get those ballots. It's a race to harvest as many ballots as you can, and Republicans didn't do it, with the exception of some congressional candidates who actually did see it. Come Mark Molinaro, great job on the ground, somebody like that. But for the most part, nationally, it was bad.
I mean, you're exactly right you're exactly right, Rich, on so many different points, from the DNC not actually doing it themselves, but working with third-party groups or nonprofits to get the job done. And you talk about it being a race and persuasion not being, that big of a thing anymore, because really it's just a matter of, like, in a state like Pennsylvania where you have 67 counties, divide that down to the precinct level. The Democrats are so surgical that they'll say, okay, we need X number of ballots from this precinct in order for us to win. And they have that down at the precinct level all across the state. And so if you got an Excel document, it's not necessarily about running millions of dollars worth of commercials, even though the Democrats will still do that because they don't want for money or donations or contributions from their side. It's not about even necessarily getting on a debate stage. It's not about any of that. It's not about persuasion. It's about playing the game better. And, proof positive of this point, Rich, was in the 2022 race with Fetterman versus Oz in the debate. One debate, right? But by the time that debate had taken place, John Fetterman already had like 475,000 early votes cast for him, which it's a separate conversation. And I think it ultimately an indictment on early voting, because how many of those people would have likely changed their vote or voted for somebody different if they knew Fetterman was in the cognitive state that he was, So Republicans for the longest time, and I say this as somebody who's been there on the ground and run campaigns as an outsider, I can tell you that Republicans focus on running campaigns, and still that mindset shift this hasn't changed. They focus on running great campaigns. Some do, some don't. But what Democrats focus on is winning elections and election law changes in each state. So to your point, these laws are changing all the time. And for the longest time, it was Mark Elias, the DNC attorney, who was leading the charge on redistricting and other election laws in different battleground states. Republicans did not have an answer for that. Not an answer at all. And again, here in Pennsylvania was ground zero for that. In this latest redistricting, Mark Elias had filed a motion to challenge the map that was drawn in the Pennsylvania legislature, which was the Constitution, according to our Constitution, the constitutional way to draw a redistricting map through the legislature, get it approved by the court. Mark Elias filed an emergency motion, a King's Bench petition, for them to take it up at the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And even though that was struck down, he still had an opportunity to address it with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court prior to the 2022 cycle. And guess whose map the radical Pennsylvania Supreme Court adopted? His map, the Carter map, which was a Democrat gerrymander, although you didn't hear that talked about on the media at all. The point I'm trying to make is the Democrats never sleep when it comes to this stuff, Rich. This is all they do. They have people that are dedicated to this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Yet you have Ron McDaniel on Hannity saying, I need money to set up these organizations. It's like, by the way, 100% right, Rich. It's already too late for 2024. It's already too late.
Especially if you're going to try to do it in a centralized way that she's talking about. So a lot of these groups in 2020, when we look back at all of this, these were third-party groups, and the donor element to this is big as well, which is that if you go to a Republican donor and say, listen, we need $500,000 to start to boot, just to clean some voter rolls in this area, to make sure that this database latency problem that the RNC has is fixed. Just in this particular, forget about nationwide. That's not even a task you can comprehend yet, but you have to start in these areas. Joe Biden won the election with 7 counties, folks. That's it. 7 counties won him the election. So they should have been all over this already, and instead they're still having the same tired arguments, and donors are still giving for things like, let's face it, I want to be able to call the candidate, so it's an access contribution, or I'm going to start a PAC that does this to back that guy, maybe runs ads. That is not how you win elections anymore. And they're going to waste their money on that stuff instead of building it's not even a get out the vote. It's something totally new. It is a gathering infrastructure. It's a gather the vote, not get out the vote. And donors don't want to hear it. And I can tell you that from experience. They don't yet understand what Democratic donors do. Democratic donors, mega donors, they'll get their checkbook out in a second, Sean. If you come to them with a plan, this is how I'm going to harvest an additional 30,000 votes in this county, then they will get their checkbook out and make it happen, not Republicans. And that's going to have to change if Republicans want to be competitive. But yeah, and then also, I can't say enough about the database latency. I have taken a lot of flack as a pollster working with left-wing vendors. Well, their data's better. So I want to have the most accurate poll that I can possibly conduct. I'm going to work with the vendors that have the more accurate data. I'm not going to sit there and every 10 calls I make get the wrong person. So that's how bad it's become an increasing problem with Republican campaigns calling Big Data Poll, emailing us over at Big Data Poll. Hey, can you scrub our list? And we do what are called matches. And we may find an address and say, so-and-so moved out of here 4 years ago. This is now this person, and we'll fix it. That is becoming an increasing job that we do that we never intended to do, and that's because of how bad Republican latency issues are. It's incredible.
I mean, you're exactly right with Republican donors, and I've seen it again. I've seen it myself firsthand. And what I see is Republican donors like to see how their money's being spent. It was always like my personal rule that 85% of every nickel that I raised went to running a campaign. That meant getting commercials on TV, sending out mail, doing things to reach voters, not going to some like high paid consulting firm, not insane operational cost with staff. Like as anybody that's worked for my campaign would tell you, we had so many volunteers that were just ready, willing, able, and enthused to actually work with the campaign. But a lot of these donors, Rich, they want to see their money spent on commercials. And the simple fact of the matter is, in a state like Pennsylvania, where Republicans are running, I think we were still down to the Democrats by 450,000 voter registrations. I mean, the Democrats don't need a single Republican vote to win in the state of Pennsylvania.
That's right.
And yet the Republicans have zero voter registration operation taking place. And I mean, there are some groups out there doing, a little here, a little there, but there's not a concerted effort to close the voter registration deficit whatsoever. And so if I went to a GOP mega donor and I said, I need, $500,000 to narrow the voter registration deficit 1 year from now by 50,000, they would probably say no, because it's really, really difficult, unsexy work. And it's hard to see a bang for your buck there. And
perfectly stated.
Democrat donors don't worry about that. The Democrats never want for money. And again, seeing a fourth generation from Pennsylvania, I know this state better than anybody else that lives here. It's unbelievably complicated to run a campaign here, just because you have blue collar Allegheny, you have union Democrats who are by and large switching to the GOP if they have the right message. You have 1.2 million independents in this state that you have to make the case for. And then you've got Republicans who are fractured between, America First Republicans and more traditional Republicans, which I want to get into your latest polling data about that. But the GOP just seems like we're behind the curve on so many different things. It's like the definition of insanity, keep doing the same thing over and over again, yet we expect a different result. And what's upsetting to me, Rich, is that in 2022, we had just amazing candidates. And we talk about, you hear a lot of these, traditional pundits talk about candidate quality as if that's the only thing that matters. And juxtaposed to that, at the same time, if they're anti-Trump, it's like, well, look at all these Trump-endorsed candidates who lost. That's all Trump does is lose. Well, that's a bunch of BS too. Because if you look at somebody like Kari Lake, who I think is immensely talented, I think if Maricopa County actually conducted their elections in a lawful way, she would be the governor of Arizona. No questions asked. Like, what they did in Maricopa County is disgraceful. But I mean, I think you could make the argument of Kari Lake being a America First Trump Republican. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is. And I obviously 100% agree with what you said. I testified at her original trial because Sean, I have never as a pollster seen what I saw. And you're instructed to give, your response, because we conduct exit polls as well. And I've conducted exit polls all over the country, never saw what I saw, which was this major disparity in the completion rate with people who voted early, even if it was in person or they dropped it off, and those who voted on election day. And what I was trying to explain to the judge is there is no reason why 90+% of early voters completed their questionnaire, but 70 actually, but I think it was 71 on the dot, of election day voters completed their questionnaire, other than they intended to vote but didn't vote, could not vote. And that has got to mean something. You can't just, and by the way, we were hearing 15 minutes after the polls closed, we were hearing from people in the exit poll, I tried to vote before work. This is crazy. Something's going wrong. The machines are down. I've got to go to work. Maybe I'll come back later. And they never came back, Sean. So what happened in Maricopa was third world disgraceful. I would never testify at a trial like that. I never even would have thought that I'd be, somebody who had a role in something like that. And I certainly don't want to be a court expert ever, but I did it because the people who were on the other end of that phone, it's so frustrating. Yeah. So it's fair to you to say Kari Lake is an America First Trump Republican. Well, she's the real deal.
Yes, she is. And so let me Adam Laxalt. I love Adam Laxalt. He's a great guy. I mean, many people would say that Adam Laxalt is a more establishment Republican. Yeah. Now, from Nevada, Kari Lake from Arizona, obviously two different states, but they both came up short. So is this really, or should the Republican Party or any of our pundits be talking about candidate quality or Trump candidate versus more establishment candidate, when I think, again, obviously candidate quality matters a little bit, but I think playing the game is so much more important and focusing on winning elections, having a good ground game, ballot chasing operation. Look at John Fetterman. Candidate quality didn't matter whatsoever with John Fetterman, right? Yeah. Look at Joe Biden. Candidate quality did not matter. Those two people are proof that it's about playing the game. It's about the system, right?
And O'Day, by the way, Senate candidate in Colorado, was not a Trump guy. In fact, distanced himself quite a bit. And he got creamed worse than we have been beaten in that state in a long time. So in a cycle that was supposed to have favored Republicans. Right? So much for that. And there were congressional candidates as well that you could make that comparison to. Alan Fung did not win Rhode Island 2. Connecticut 5 was lost. I mean, we could just go down the board. There were more traditionalists and MAGA Republicans that lost, and there's another reason that they lost, and what you're pointing out. Years ago, when I was telling you about developing those models for fun like a dork, candidate quality used to mean a lot more, right? Because it meant what's their appeal, how well can they fundraise. That's what went in our modeling, things like that went into candidate quality. Obviously, I don't know how you can argue that candidate quality, of course, still matters, but it's not what it used to be. The fact of the matter is, Gibbs just got beat out in Michigan 3 because he didn't have the ground operation that Hillary Scholten had. Somebody like in Virginia 7, for instance, and Virginia 2, they should not have been that close in that result. What was the difference? Well, one had a robust ballot harvesting operation. The other one did not, right? In Pennsylvania 5, where you are, great candidate. David Galuch, not at all, to be seen as to, an election denier. He has a great veteran story. He had a great biography. Candidate quality does not get any better than that. But it's hard to do anything with that if all of the drop boxes are in urban parts of the state, in Delco and what little bit of Philadelphia you have. All of the harvesting operation benefited the Democrats in the Democratic areas, so it was hard to even make a dent there. At the end of the day, it's easy to make these claims because it fits an easy media narrative, and we're in the middle of a primary, and anyone who's not named Trump wants to talk about that because you're looking for an argument to make the primary voters why you shouldn't pick Donald Trump. But I think that does a disservice to the movement going forward because everyone's going to continue to lose, Sean. This is what I'm trying to explain to everybody. Everybody is going to lose. It doesn't matter if Trump's the candidate. It doesn't matter if DeSantis is the candidate. If Republicans don't get their act together, they're going to continually come up short with these, very heartbreaking losses that they in races they should have won. Right? That's
you're exactly right. And I want to talk about 2024 and your latest polling that just came out today. But DeSantis, obviously, he's going to be declaring for president very, very soon. Talk about a Republican governor. I like Ron DeSantis. I think he's been a great governor for Florida. He's done things. I mean, one can even make the argument that he's largely responsible for why Republicans have a majority in the House of Representatives with the way that he took control and took command of redistricting in that state. But Ron DeSantis is a good
job for him, by the way.
Yeah. Well, if you look at Ron DeSantis and what he did in Florida, is like when Republican governor in power, he changes the election law to the point where he does everything that he can to be a great governor, embrace the Constitution, election integrity. He's advanced election integrity measures in the state of Florida. My point is, I say all that to say it benefited him in the state of Florida. Like we're in the state of Pennsylvania. The situation's completely different. We had a Democrat governor in Tom Wolf, a Democrat governor in Josh Shapiro. They wield the power on whether or not we change our system here. So Republicans who are sitting back and saying, I don't like mail-in, I don't want to do a ballot chasing operation in the state of Pennsylvania. We don't need that. We can beat them on enthusiasm. We can beat them on election day vote. It's just not the case. We have to play the game like they do. We have to play it better than they do, Rich. And then we have to win. We have to take power. And then we can change the system just like Ron DeSantis did in Florida.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. You got to work with the system that you have, right? And by the way, I mean, for people who dismiss the impact of some of the things that you just said, firing and removing Brenda Snipes from Broward County, which is a law Texas Republicans are basically trying to give the power to the governor that Ron DeSantis and every other governor of Florida has. You look at locally in Florida, it's a supervisor of election. This person is a continuous problem. There's always questions about fraud or irregularities or whatever is going on. Regardless, she has a 7:30 deadline to meet reporting deadline. How much mail-in vote do you have? How many election votes do you have? And constantly missing it, you can fire her and remove her. All right, this is what they're going to give to Texas. It looks like it's going to pass if it survives court challenges. But it had a major impact because anybody who thinks that the Republican share in Broward County suddenly skyrocketed by double digits when they removed Brenda Snipes. If you think that's unrelated, you're naive, right? So even Trump, Republicans would end up with 17 to 23% of the vote share, and in 20 because he had removed because DeSantis had removed Brenda Snipes. I don't think anybody thought that Trump would get that many votes in Broward County or that share of the vote, and he did. Right. So, I mean, this stuff matters a lot, but you have to work with what you have. And in your neck of the woods out by you, we were working with races and local races to try to make this case and to come up with basically experiments that we're running to show people it is worth the money. So we had those school board races in Central Bucks. And we were able to, we didn't win it, but we were able to increase the share of Republican early vote with not, by the way, if I had my wish list of everything I would have liked to do. They're not very, well funded in little races like that or local races like that. But if I had my wish list, we would have done even better. So, Sean, we didn't have to rely on this deluge of election day votes to help us, in the primary. We didn't have to rely on that. Of course, we wanted it and we got it, but it was the difference. It made a lot of difference when you can increase your early vote by 20%. It makes a huge difference. So they're working with the laws that they have. And when they, put that work in, it's going to pay, dividends down the long run. And then you can change the law. But right now it is what it is.
So you got to talk to me about what you see in 2024. But before you do, I will give you my thoughts. Now, I think most people would know publicly that I'm a Trump guy. And the answer to that question is yes, of course I am. Loyalty to me is a shocking. Well, it's actually not a thing. It's actually not shocking to me, but loyalty really isn't a thing to most people in politics.
It's so true.
But our party, that's why I think Truman said if you want loyalty in politics. Yeah. If you want loyalty in politics, Truman said, get a dog, right? And I understand that, but I think that as a party, the Republican Party would be much better off if we were more loyal to people who helped us when we first started out. President Trump was that to me. He's always been good to me. I'm good friends with his sons and his family. So yes, I have President Trump's back because of that. But I also like Ron DeSantis. I don't really have a bad thing to say about him, other than I will say this. I would say it. When Ron was out there and he was like doing his book tour and he was asked about the polling and he said, "Well, I'm not really in the race yet." And I thought, like,
come on,
man. Yeah, come on. Yeah, yes, you are. I don't like those political answers. I hate that stuff. I hate political gamesmanship. The obvious answer was, of course, you're in the race. Like, you could have had a better answer for that. I didn't like the idea that he was out there basically campaigning for president while on a book tour. A lot of people do it. Like, this is just me personally, by the way. And I'm not trashing Ron DeSantis. I'm not. But it looks like President Trump, even if you look at the Real Clear Politics average, is he running away with this thing? I mean, he's well over 50% now.
Yes.
And with what, like 8 different people in the race, 8 or 9 different people in the race? I mean, I think the more people that are in the race, the more it benefits President Trump as well. I mean, it just feels like he's running away with it.
And again, you're allowed to have your opinion. Like some of these people who, if you say one bad thing about the governor, they flip out. And it's not even a bad thing. Like, it's an observation. Their logic that they based this run on is flawed. And it has been flawed. They have been telling donors about it for a year, which, by the way, I don't know if you noticed, but we had basically just reported what donors told us a year ago, and he was publicly stating he wasn't going to run, but the donors were, of course, hearing Trump will be indicted, so, he's going to sink then, and the second one was, if I can get him one-on-one, I will beat him. This is the problem with, not everyone's a statistician, Sean, but if you're above 50%, that argument isn't going to work. They really believe that a majority of Republican voters were ready to move on from Donald Trump. And they looked at the environment after the midterms when everyone was blaming Trump for the underperformance. And they looked at that and they thought, okay, he's vulnerable. This is what we're talking about. Here's evidence. Even in our polling, and we were less bullish on Trump than others until recently, we had him with softer support. The closest we ever had DeSantis is Trump was at 43, DeSantis was at 31. Something has changed since then. And so you're asking if he's running away with it. This is what I would tell people who are saying, wait till an announcement. They already knew he was running. The poll we released in Florida, the voters were very clear. And stop. We love you, but don't insult our intelligence. We love you as governor. We want Trump back. Let's just shake hands and move on. You're down in your own state, and losing a primary in your own state is a career ender. It's over for you if that happens. And that looks to be, Sean, like that's going to happen. Trump is way ahead in Florida. And at one time, DeSantis was very close. But it never was because DeSantis had a large share of the vote. It was simply because Trump had fallen a little bit, and there was some people who were unsure. I really think this is the biggest problem DeSantis has. And I think it's going to translate to the other candidates. The question over the war in Ukraine is a major issue for primary voters. They are non-interventionist voters at this point. And when Tucker asked Ron DeSantis for that statement, and he gave what really was a MAGA statement, the statement that you need to put out if you're going to run for the Republican presidential nomination. He got flack from donors. He got flack from, Fox News, the media, and he flip-flopped. And then he didn't know where to go. He didn't know where he was. And people started dredging up statements about him saying, we need to stop Putin. We have to arm the Ukrainians. There's even a letter out there with him pushing then Secretary of State John Kerry for the coup. So people had this doubt, this distrust. He's a great governor, but on the national stage, why would we take a risk on somebody we don't know? We just don't know where he's going to stand on these issues. And from what I'm seeing, I don't think I can trust him. And it's like they like him, but on these issues that really determine who's going to be the Republican nominee, he lost that trust. And that is the beginning. If you go back and look at the trend, the Tucker flip-flop is the beginning of DeSantis' decline. And then, unfortunately, a week or two later, the indictment happened, and he bungled how he handled that. And I think that reinforced. A lot of pundits and others out there are saying that's it. That was the moment he got hurt. It's not. He was hurt with the statement on Ukraine, and then that just reinforced people who kind of went back to unsure, and that when they saw that, that was a confirmation to them that, oh man, okay, that's it. I'm back to Trump. So now these are people who are decided, and it's not, we were talking about a game of persuasion. It's much more difficult. There's a reason why nobody's ever had a polling lead like Trump and not gone on to be the nominee. Hillary Clinton in 2008 never got near Trump's levels, and she only touched 50 in Gallup once. Everyone else had her around 40. So it's not a comparable example that people keep using. Nobody is lost with Trump's polling levels, and the reason is simple. You're no longer talking about winning people over. You have to now change their minds. You can't, this idea you can get them head-to-head is not true. If you get them head-to-head, you're going to lose 65-35, maybe even worse. You have to change people's minds again. And these are people who, if you ask them, Sean, they said, I was undecided already 2 months ago. Now I'm decided. I don't know that they're going to budge. The old voice of Rush Limbaugh is in my head. No outside influence is going to tear these voters away from Trump. Only Trump could do it. And I really think, the truth is, even when he was the lowest he ever was at 43, their argument was laughable because you're telling me you're going to prevent him from getting 7%, and that's all he was away from 50. It's an enormous task, Sean. And it's not, one poll a month he had that level. He has always been this strong. So I got to tell you, it's not looking good for anyone not named Donald Trump. It's getting very difficult.
It's everything you say is so interesting, Rich. And I think, a lot of DeSantis folks, especially as influencers and stuff, will say, well, hey, this isn't 2016. And certainly, times change. They're right. This isn't 2016. But Donald Trump is, I think, a once-in-a-lifetime political figure, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, by the way. And, I think people make mistakes all the time, the pundit class, of associating the popularity of Trump-endorsed candidates with the popularity of Donald Trump himself. They're two totally different things. Right. Now, a Trump endorsement is very, very important. I mean, I think Dr. Oz probably won the primary in 2022 in the state of Pennsylvania by 900 votes, precisely because he had Donald Trump's endorsement to get him across the goal line. And Ron DeSantis barely beat a meth addict back when he ran. It was Donald, and Donald Trump was the one that got him across the goal line.
He did.
And so
he did.
Donald Trump brings out the craziest cross-section of voters that I've ever seen. You can't pry away some of these union Democrats from voting for Donald Trump. You just can't, right. Especially in Western Pennsylvania. I was talking to a union leader of a building trade union leader here in Western PA saying, they worked really hard to try to get people not to vote for Donald Trump, but they couldn't convince people to do it, because I think, and here's why. I think that authenticity really, it's the coin of the realm in American politics today. Whereas a lot of Republicans don't like Trump's comportment. They don't like maybe sometimes how he they don't like maybe sometimes his bombast. But they know that even if they disagree with those things, that the man is who he is.
Yep.
And when you see other politicians, in the example you use in Ukraine, and the DeSantis statement to Tucker, and then the subsequent flip flop, I think people think, "Whoa, I can't really trust this guy." Whoa, there's somebody behind the curtain that's maybe making decisions. Well, I can tell you this about Donald Trump, having known him and known his inner circle for a long time. Nobody pulls the strings for Donald Trump. Nobody. He is who he is, and
sure.
I just think, I think that. Do you think, I guess I'll ask you this, do you think other candidates now for the 24 race on the Republican side are getting in this race, like Tim Scott, because they smell blood in the water? They don't think DeSantis is as strong as maybe he once was?
Yes. And Glenn Youngkin, we could probably expect him as well. I mean, we get a call from a lot of donors because they want to know, does this guy have a prayer and, what kind of snowball's chance in, hell to win? So we get a lot of calls. And, Glenn Youngkin's been running around for weeks going, I told you he wasn't ready for prime time. Tim Scott has a little bit of an advantage, even though Glenn Youngkin, I think, probably would be, once he gets on the trail, he'd probably be an attractive candidate. Tim Scott, unfortunately, nice guy, but he's not saying the message. At least Youngkin knows some of the base's message. He knows what they want to hear. Tim Scott doesn't. He's speaking to a very small, section of the Republican Party that, frankly, demographically speaking, is dying out. They're older, and there's no young support for that wing of the Republican Party. So over time, it literally will disappear. But Tim Scott also has, because of his committee assignments, Oracle, by the way, the head of Oracle, also a lot of Wall Street guys. I mean, because he's been basically I don't want to say a permanent fixture. That's not fair. But he has been very responsive to them. It's just part of the role he plays in the Senate. They like him. And they also view him as, he's a very likable guy. If anybody who meets him in person, I don't know if you have, Sean, but he's a super nice guy. I mean, he's hard to dislike. Mm-hmm. You may disagree with him, but he's hard to dislike. They're going to look around, but at this point, it's really, I don't want to say futile, but I mean, I don't know what other word for it. There is no other candidate. DeSantis, I do believe, had the best chance to pull some of Trump's own vote away from him. But the problem is he didn't know what lane to get in. And that's why and that exposes that you're not authentic. When you flip-flop like that, you're telling MAGA that you can't be trusted on these issues. They're already skeptical of you. And you're kind of telling the moderate lane that you're posing to be MAGA instead of trying to just be in that moderate lane. So, Nikki Haley, for whatever people can say about her, she's been very consistent. I'm in this lane. This is, the president and I agree on a lot, but we also disagree here, here, and here. And that's why I'm in a different lane. Harry Enten basically echoed something that I had said. He is 100%. There's no lane for DeSantis to go in and dominate. So he can't go in Trump's lane, which is more conservative, which is non-white, by the way, more non-white, more diverse, more dynamic. He can't go into that MAGA lane and dominate Trump because you can't out-Trump Trump. You just can't do it, right? So that leaves you with the moderate lane, which, if we're just talking numbers here, is about, if you're lucky, if they're lucky, is going to be about 30% moderate and liberal. 70% is going to be conservative. And Trump is approaching in some polling, and he has surpassed it. Super majority support among conservatives in the party. So, we always talk about this in terms of lanes as if this is a horse race, but it really is true. Where's his lane? Where's anybody's lane? There isn't a liberal lane. It's 5%, right? So that you could theoretically get some conservatives, put that together with the moderates. But as a slew of polls came out today showed, it's not big enough. So even if you get the guy head to head, the best you could hope to do is like 70-30. And honestly, that may collapse as time goes on. It may, because I think that they're going to, I've always been of the mind they were going to indict him and that it would backfire. And I think because Alvin Bragg was the first one to do it, he hurt people who may otherwise have stronger cases, because now everyone's just going to see it as a fake indictment. They're trying to stop this guy. And it isn't 2016. It isn't 2015. But it's also not 2020 either. And the truth is, he is much stronger now than he ever was in 2015. When he was leading with 35% of the vote, folks. Go look it up on Real Clear Politics. 35, 40%, never 60, 55. The truth is, these CNN polls and others, they're coming around to where people like myself and Emerson College, Morning Consult, others have been. We've been two different universes of pollsters up until this point. But I would argue they're following our trend, and we had a primary in Kentucky, which gave us a chance to see who was, more closely reflecting the actual sentiment of the electorate. And those of us who are now more bullish on Trump saw Cameron running away with that thing, not really a close race, compared to others who did think it was a closer race and that maybe Kraft could even catch him at the end. I mean, folks, that was a serious argument 24 hours before the election. If she can get DeSantis' endorsement, maybe she doesn't eclipse Cameron, but she can nip him at the heels and we can create a narrative. And that really was their thinking. She got crushed. So it tells us that those like Emerson, myself, we're closer. Trump is much, much stronger than some of the CNN and others are showing. And it's very difficult to bring him down from there. Very difficult.
God, it's so interesting, Rich, because I think many voters, many voters that I come into contact with believe that President Trump was treated very unfairly on the campaign trail in 2016. He had 4 years of his presidency basically stolen from him with one hoax after the next and all this impeachment stuff. It was all completely made up. And I think the Durham report, even though I'm disappointed with the actual outcome, what are the action steps after the fact? It shows people that maybe were on the fence, that were maybe more traditional conservatives. It shows them that, oh my gosh, this guy, this was a hoax all along. This guy is being unfairly targeted, and everybody's against him. And so I think that just makes his poll numbers go up. People that, and what I mean, Rich, is that 2018 is a good example where the Russia hoax just started to come to fruition. Republicans took a shellacking in that midterm election precisely, and I think Connor Lamb was a good example of this. He was swept into power in a Republican district, I think because there were a lot of Republicans, very moderate Republicans, which there are a lot of in Pennsylvania, more moderate Republicans thinking, oh my gosh, is the president a Russian asset? When you talk about election interference, that hoax was the definition of election interference because the Democrats took the majority in the House and the Senate, I think in 2018. If memory, they definitely in the House, not sure about the Senate. But the point is, I think many people realize that all that was completely bogus now. And so to your point, Trump is stronger now than he ever was before with all of these BS hoaxes behind him. And so when you look forward at things, Rich, transition to this latest polling that you had come out today, what I thought was really interesting was the difference between a percentage of Republicans who consider themselves America first versus more traditional Republicans. Can you talk a little bit about that?
This is why we wanted to, and that's for for full disclosure. John O'Shea, Kay Granger currently represents this district, but she's 80 years old. She's probably going to retire, but there will be some more moderate people who tried, or at least one. There will be a moderate person next to John O'Shea, who is most definitely the America First candidate in that district. And there's a reason why I found this district interesting. Tarrant County, largest red county in the country, population-wise. But if you believe 2020, if you believe everything was on the up and up, Trump barely lost it by a few thousand votes. If you believe everything was on the up and up. This district is educated. It's wealthy, right? So if you're going to beat Donald Trump, you've got to beat him in this area because we just polled the entire state and Trump was killing him. I mean, it was 60-16, Sean. 60-16 in the Lone Star State. And a lot of that, by the way, was coming from these Hispanics. And in that poll, I got to mention this, these Hispanics who say, I'm not Republican. I'm an America First Republican, but I'm not a Republican. They really make this distinction. And they're going to come out for Trump in states like Texas, and it's going to surprise people because it's going to happen. But yeah, in this, we asked people whether or not you were an America First Republican or a traditional Republican. Which one do you identify as? And on the primary question, I really thought this is a district where I'm going to see DeSantis probably in the 30s. Why? 20% have a postgraduate degree, right? 28% have a bachelor's degree. It's an educated area, and they make a lot of money. Well, it didn't turn out that way. Trump is beating him by 31 points, and DeSantis is at low 20s. I really thought he would be at least closer to 30, if not at 30. And Trump, if you're going to hold him below 50, this would be the district to hold him below 50, and they're not doing it. And when you ask them where do they come down on this, 55, or really 56 if you round, say they're America First Republicans, only about a quarter say they're more like a traditionalist Republican. And if you look, this is some interesting stuff, because if you look at the 20+% who said they're unsure, we did ask other questions that will be public soon, and you can see they're America First. I mean, Sean, they just don't want to say it. It goes to that social bias and that shy vote you were talking about before. They don't want to admit it because this is a very wealthy, affluent area, and they know the bias. They know the stigma, and they know what's the right answer here, and they're afraid to give it because they don't want to be looked at in a certain way. And interesting, white voters, obviously a majority are America First, but it's not a majority like we see with non-white Republicans. And this district will be about 7% will be Hispanic. 83% of them chose America First over traditional Republican. 83. That's why Trump, can win Zapata County. That's why he can flip star 60+ points and we get killed. Not for nothing, but South Texas, perfect example of seats Republicans were supposed to win. Texas 15 is a Trump +3 district. They lost it by, I think, almost 10 points, right? Texas 34, she was a great candidate. And it's a hard district to win. But she lost it by as much as you would expect that she would still lose it before the districts got more Republican over there. So just a total disappointment. And the fact is, Sean, those voters, if those Hispanic voters particularly, they'll come out, and if they do, and Trump's on the ballot, they'll not only vote for Trump, but they will give the Republican below Trump on that ticket their support. But if they come out and Trump is not on the ballot, it's not at all guaranteed that they're going to vote Republican, and that's if you can even get them out without Trump. And that is a major problem Republicans have. I don't know how they can look back at all of these cycles, midterms, presidentials, 2012 to now, and not see that they have a major turnout problem when Trump is not on the ticket. So the worst thing that could happen to them, let's say Trump isn't the nominee and something happens. The worst thing that could happen to them is the case of the missing white voter all over again, like we saw in 2012, only it's not just white. It's all of these new, younger, non-white MAGA Republicans that, without a doubt, will come out and vote for Donald Trump, but they will stay home like they did for Mitt Romney in 12. And that's how we lost.
Wow. Rich, man, it is 2024 is going to be so interesting. And, of course, I'm going to be turning to you. And those of you all who are watching and listening, you should also go and trust the People's Pundit, Rich Baris. Like, what's the website? BigDataPoll.com, right?
BigDataPoll.com. Best place to follow me. Everything we're doing is on Locals. peoplespundit.locals.com, which you can sign up and just be a member. But there's membership supporters. Anything we do from there is like the central hub, Sean. So Big Data Poll is cool and everything. And we give them all those graphics and trackers and everything there. But most of those links we'll share out to Locals. It's the best place to follow us.
Well, awesome, Rich. I'd love to have you back, 6 months from now or sooner, of course, based on your schedule, because I love to get your feedback and your view of the terrain. But can't thank you enough for coming on, and we're just really, really appreciate it, Rich. Thank you.
And thank you for having me. Anytime, Sean. Enjoyed it.
All right, brother.
Talk soon.
All right, take care. Okay, everybody, that's a wrap. I hope you liked the People's Pundit. I think the dude is just phenomenal. follow him on Twitter. He's rolling out a new poll almost on the weekly. He's always got great insight into what's happening in congressional districts all across the country, statewide races for Senate and for governor, and obviously the presidential cycle in 2024 is going to be critically important. I personally think if Republicans don't win in 2024, we might not have a country left after that. So it's a very, very important cycle. Pay attention to it. Go to the website, officialseanparnell.com. We've got Battleground apparel there. Again, subscribe to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. I've also got a YouTube channel, but what we're really putting a lot of effort into right now is our Rumble channel. And really where we're at is why would we invest a lot of time, energy, money, resources into YouTube when a year from now they could just ban my whole channel? Why not just invest all that time and energy in Rumble right now? And that's what we're doing. So go subscribe to Rumble. Watch the podcast there. We break it down into super manageable clips for you. And again, God bless you. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the commitment. Thank you for tuning in and watching. And God bless you all. And God bless this incredible country that we live in. Take care.